Good morning and welcome to On the Record with Buddy Cianci. This morning, I've got a guest here. You probably don't even recognize who he is, but he's a guy. Every week we have a politician or a person in the community to come on and talk about the particular view they may have on a certain topic. Well, every year I try to do a show at the end of the year concerning what are the big news stories, what did we watch last year, and what interested us, and what are we going to look forward to next year. And it's the end of the year, so I decided that who better to have than a mystery guest, a guy who knows the news. He's here every night, sitting at this desk, delivering you the news and the headlines and the stories and the back part of the story and the front part of the story. None other than your anchor every day here at Channel 6, John DeLuca. John, thanks for doing this, by the way.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for asking me to be
Thank
here
you, and
tonight.
Merry Christmas to you and your family. It's been an eventful year. Every night I watch you on television, and you have a headline, but there's 365 days a year, and the news cycle goes up and down and up and down, and old stories seem to come back again and again, and new stories develop. This past year, we had Rhode Island will never be will never be in famine for lack of news stories, good news stories and political stories. What do you think the biggest news story was this past year? The dominant news story, as the Pell Center calls it.
I would say the dominant story throughout the year was the roads and bridges and the toll legislation with the governor trying to get that passed. I mean, in the beginning of the year, we talked about everything was weather. Yeah. I know you like to talk about the politics of snow and all the incredible amounts of storm, and in February was the coldest, snowiest record ever for New England.
Right.
And the new governor and the transition there. But as the year went on, I think the whole effort to get that toll proposal in, and everybody seemed to be on board in the beginning, if you remember. They had that press conference, and the speaker was there, the Senate president was there, and of course the governor was there. And then as the details started to trickle out, then the speaker kind of peeled back, the Senate president peeled back momentarily, but then got on board, and then nothing seemed to happen. And then there was a whole level of distrust that seemed to come up from the truckers saying, hey, why us? Yeah. To what are the details of this, where are the gantries going to go, and it just really seemed to spiral out of control.
And it's still going for a whole
And nothing has been settled as we speak today, and it won't be, obviously, between now and the next session.
No, absolutely not.
So that, to me, was the biggest story of the year.
Do you think the rollout was done wrong, though? She stood up on at 610 connected with everybody there, and the speaker was there, I guess, because he was invited to be there and said he'd do everything he could to get the thing done, but, he had to verify everything. The Senate president was there, the unions were there. It looked, when they announced it, as if it were a slam dunk.
Yes.
And it was far from that, because they didn't do their homework, apparently, and didn't have the right I's dotted or the right T's crossed.
Well, I would love to know, behind closed doors, what was discussed as to, hey, Mr. Speaker, Ms. Senate President, the unions, this is what we'd like to do. Okay, great, yeah, that's jobs, it's wonderful, we need to have this. These roads and bridges are all decaying and aging. But what were the specifics? I wonder how much specifics, as if there was, what changed? And in my mind, it was all general terms. So everybody was on board with the initial, yes, it's great for Rhode Island, we need this, the infrastructure improvements, federal money, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, as soon as the specifics get involved.
And we still don't have the specifics.
And we still don't. And I think that's the reason why the speaker and the governor seem to butt heads over.
And there are so many different ways now. One door closes, the other one opens. You think you got one problem solved in the puzzle, and another puzzle door opens, and that, for instance, not only where the gantry is going to go, how much are they going to be, there's a dispute over how many trucks are going to go over the highways between the Truckers Association and the governor's count or the Department of Transportation count. There's a question of whether you use a general obligation bond or a revenue bond. The revenue bond is twice as expensive. All these things are going to be worked out, but that has been a dominant story. What's the next, if that's still, now the Pell Center at Salve Regina University had a group of people who are journalists who put together what they thought their list of the biggest story was. They said the dominant story was, and I don't know what they really mean by that. I had the head of the Pell Center on the show, radio show, and a dominant, I guess, means that it was in the news a lot, and I guess it was the Pawtucket Red Sox. Do you think that was the more important, or not more important, but more dominant in the news than the road situation?
Maybe because, and I'm just guessing here, buddy, because it affects Joe and Mary Blue Jean. Because everyone loves the Red Sox. That's our state team, we have politics as our sport, but everybody loves it. Everybody has a McCoy Stadium story where they went as a kid, or their grandfather took them, or whatever. And to see what transpired so dramatically. Jim Skeffington comes in and says, all right, we're buying this team, we're gonna move the team, forget you, Pawtucket, we're going to Providence. And that was another situation where the details clearly had not been worked out. In theory, they said, oh, here's some land in Providence. Wouldn't it be great if we put a stadium there? And then you find out when you research it how many things need to happen, how many hurdles need to be cleared before that stadium
You
ever
know,
gets built.
there's a theme running through these stories: preparation and doing the work in front.
Don't
and
announce
getting the
something
ducks-
until you know
exactly. what's going to happen. It's tough to keep stories like this quiet, but at least you go to the people who are in charge and say, is this a doable deal or not? And there were so many big hitters involved. But the Pawtucket Red Sox had the three rails, the third rail, I should say, the third rail of politics written all over it. It had moving a team from one city to another city. So you're actually going to have internecine warfare between the politicians on one side, who are in Pawtucket, and Providence, and all that. And then there wasn't a lot of overwhelming support in Providence for the team to come. The East Side were against it. Some downtown people were against it because of traffic and all that. And then it had the other third rail, which was subsidized public money.
As soon as public money came in on the heels of 38 Studios,
Yeah,
that was
exactly.
just like, whoa, that's toxic.
That was a third rail.
And
Boom.
Mr. Skeffington, when he was behind it, he was the biggest cheerleader for it, obviously, and he was the person out front every time. He was so optimistic about it and enthusiastic about it, and everybody, I think, kind of followed that, and then they started to look at it and go, well, wait a minute.
I think he was blinded by the fact that he had such a love for the team and the city.
And loved baseball.
And thought, he thought everybody was going to join in. But as you say, 38 Studios put a real chill on all that stuff, and I think we still haven't recovered from that. So I don't know if it was a dominant story, but it certainly was an important story. And as a result, you can see nothing has happened in both those areas, the Roads or the Pawtucket Red Sox. And Pawtucket Red Sox has faded. I haven't heard a word about the Pawtucket Red Sox in weeks.
Well, I mean, Springfield, Worcester, I think Worcester is ready to make some kind of a deal and maybe throw public money at them. I don't see it happening in the state.
I don't
The
either.
Speaker's not going to do it. The governor certainly is not going to do it. Senate President Paiva-Weed is not unfair. I mean, it's one of those things where, okay, you want to move the team, but if you don't have any place else to go, all of a sudden McCoy Stadium becomes attractive again. It's like, oh, how much does it cost to fix up McCoy Stadium?
I think that's where we're going to end up, by the way. That's my own personal feeling, but I have no evidence to prove that. The other story that we could talk about that also was dominant, even though it happened years ago, it still is like an old shoe. It keeps coming back. It's 38 Studios.
Well, that's the gift that keeps on giving to the news business, if you think about it, because there's so much involved with it. So wait a minute. So how did you talk everybody into this and subpoena this one and nobody's showing up, and what can the House Oversight Committee actually do? I mean, it's one of those things. We joke in the newsroom all the time about doing this about that. Something that seems like it's on the surface doing something productive, but when you really look into it, nothing's getting done. The House Oversight Committee, I think, falls into that category because they really have no power, even though they have the subpoena power from the Speaker.
Finally.
No one's showing up.
No one's showing
Fred
up.
Schilling's not going to show up. Corso's never going to show up. He's not going to show up at gunpoint. They couldn't kidnap him and drag him in there. He's not going in.
And Corso, I mean, he already took the fifth, as you say, and Costantino, who's the other person they're subpoenaing, he's going to come in. He's volunteering to come in. So you don't have to subpoena me. I'll come in and tell you what you want to know.
And he's a politician too. He knows how to talk. He's not. He knows exactly what he's going to get from that crowd.
Yeah, and he knows.
He's in his element there. That's a smart move for him. If I'm him, I would do the same thing. If I had nothing to hide. This is what happened. This is how it came down. We talked about it.
Yeah, but the big thing is whether he informed the legislature that whether or not he knew it was for 38 Studios. That's his only. And there's nothing criminal there. It's about whether he knew or not.
Exactly. Nothing criminal. That's the key.
Yeah, but that'll go on and on and on.
But the paperwork, though, buddy. I know you read through it on a Friday night, just like this. How many thousands you paid? Nice glass of wine. I can see you.
Yeah,
a little glass of wine as you're going through.
Oh,
and Dr. 3852, page 14, paragraph 6.
And the press did a good job, deciphering all that because it was tedious work. And I just don't think we're the end of that. The state police is supposed to be investigating that. But remember, one important thing the governor did in that investigation is she said that she did not want any criminal charges to be brought until their civil litigation was over. And I think that's where the big mistake has been made. And I can't believe the state police would go along with that. But that's what she did say. All right, let's move on. The other big story that we certainly is part of the news. It's maybe because I try to keep it alive, but it's a very, very important story, especially recently. That's pensions, which they still haven't resolved any of the municipal pension situations, which are tough. But the state pension system, it seems to be heading back into the same. The unfunded liability is climbing. They're still into hedge funds, and they only made 0.88% this year.
It was a rough year for the stock market for everybody.
Yeah, and so now they've had a 7.5% actuarial assumption. Last year was only 2.2% that they received in return on the investment, And so our unfunded liability keeps climbing, and that's going to be a story that we're going to see next year, which we'll get into after the break. But pensions have not gone away as a big story, and it was a pretty dominant story because of the settlement of the pensions lawsuit this past year. Wouldn't you say that was a big story?
Well, people would say when they hear you say that, oh, the settlement. Well, it settled.
Solved everything. No, it didn't.
It didn't solve everything. And the problem with, I think, what's going on for people who do collect a pension, the last few years the stock market's done really well. Even a hack like me, and my 401k and my little retirement that I'm working on, I did pretty well. State of Rhode Island didn't do very well.
No, it didn't.
And when this year came, and it's questioned as we go into the final days of the year, and the market is half days and things. Maybe it goes up a little bit for the year, so maybe it's a little positive, the S&P and the Dow.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, these are the times that you weather these years because you've done so well when everything was going gangbusters for the last 5, 6, 7. It's been a bull market for the last 5 years.
But we've paid
for Rhode
out
Island to not have benefited from that is a real red flag, buddy.
Yep. And then the 4 years that Raimondo was there, went into high-paying fees of $70, $80, $90 million a year to hedge funds.
Well, that was supposed to offset the bad times.
Yeah, but we didn't get.
But the good times were there. You didn't even really need it.
No, and then the hedge funds have had the worst years they've ever had. So that's a story that will develop further, but also as part of the dialogue.
So you're saying the unfunded liability becomes more of a story, that it's becoming so dramatic that you.
Yeah, you can only get the money replenished because you have to pay so much out to pensioners, either from the worker, and we already know what that number is going to be.
You can't hit them again.
No, because they've already settled and they've taken their medicine. You get it from the investment fund, which we know is performing extremely poorly, and then you get it from the taxpayers. And so when we had an unfunded liability that dropped to $4 billion, $4.5 billion from 5.5, whatever it was, it's now climbing up again. And so there's only one way to get that money. We lost $400 million in the past year.
What does your experience tell you is going to happen? Do you change the people who invest? Do you change the way it's invested? Do you change who looks over who invests that?
Next week, Speaker Mattiello is going to be my guest right in that chair. And he was a guest several months ago, and we talked about the very same topic because I could see this thing going the wrong way. And I said, what is the legislature doing about it? Because that's a big responsibility. You can forget these other things like Red Sox and all these in tolling, because that's going to be a problem that raises its ugly head again, and you're going to have to be responsible for it because the taxpayers are going to have to come up with the money to replace it if you want to keep the unfunded liability down to a level that's manageable. And so we'll see what he has to say, but that should be a story for next year. Another big story this past year is look at the weather outside. I mean, the weather's been like it's been like
you come in with
Miami
your shorts
Beach.
and flip-flops on. You can't see him.
Yeah.
His buddy's wearing his shorts and his flip-flops.
And that's as we like to call it, the politics of snow. The city and the state is saving money. Big story last year at this time was the snow removal. Remember, back in December,
January, February. December was nice, and then January hit,
January,
and then
February, boom.
But I thought the governor did pretty well with that. I mean, right in first day on the job, so to speak.
Well, half that job, when you have a state that's been doing it for years and years and years, and you have the right people that have been doing it, it's going to happen automatically, pretty much. And I don't want to take anything away from the governor. Yeah,
but we've seen in the past, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, when kids were stuck right outside of Orm Street with Mayor Cicilline and Governor Paceri, that fiasco.
That was because it wasn't a bad snowstorm either. It was because of poor management. But that was the city. But the state, they're saving a lot of money because usually when you budget snowstorms, you budget for 5 years. And you take an average, and that's what you put in the budget. And so this year, the city of Providence and the state of Rhode Island are going to be saving quite a bit of money because they probably by this time would have spent $250,000. It's probably $8,000–$10,000 an inch that you pay to clean it up. And so the politics, that's one good thing. Mother Nature has helped us this year fiscally. Going to take a break. They're talking in my ear like they talk to you in your ear every night. But right now...
Maybe that's why I'm going crazy, buddy. People talking in my ear all the time.
We'll continue with ABC 6 anchor John DeLuca as we examine the stories of 2015, and we'll move into what we can expect in 2016 right after this break. Good morning, and once again, happy holidays. With me is ABC anchor John DeLuca as we review 2015 and move forward into 2016. We're talking about the stories that made the big news, the dominant news last year. There's a lot more we could talk about. The firefighters in the city of Providence and the mayor just arbitrarily saying, I'm changing your shifts from 4 platoons to 3 platoons. And not having enough the man found out didn't have enough firefighters to do it that way, and now the city is incurring tremendous debts. They're in arbitration now.
But that really took a turn, buddy, when the real distrust showed itself publicly. I'm sure behind closed doors it's been there all along, but publicly it showed itself when the mayor and the public safety commissioner came out and said, basically, these guys are calling in sick on Mondays and Fridays, and we don't believe that they're actually sick.
Right.
And then Paul Doughty was extremely upset about that and saying, all right, prove it. If you have records and proof that we're calling in sick, and that Paul Doughty said, we have the people ready to work, and you don't want to call them back and all this stuff. So it's really taken a turn now where there's no trust on either side.
No,
How
right.
that gets settled, I don't know. You know it better than just about anybody because Mayor Lors is saying he's saving money by doing this in the long run. The firefighters are saying the exact opposite. You're not saving anything. In fact, the overtime is going to cost you an arm and a leg.
The city auditor, I've had him on my radio show, and it's absolutely costing the city. Probably end up they've got about $5 million budgeted for overtime.
For the fiscal year.
Yeah, and they have now used up about, it is now December, they've used up just about all of that. So now they have to go to the second half of the fiscal year, and I can't think anything will change. So it'll probably be they're anticipating a $7 million, $6 million deficit over what they already have incurred. And it just makes it impossible. I don't know how you say you're saving money when the city auditor is saying that you're overspending by $700,000 a month. And the reason it's happening is because the department has shrunk to personnel-wise to levels I don't think the department's been lower in numbers. And so when you have 3 platoons and you have a 94-person requirement, mandatory staffing, minimum manning, and you don't forget all those 360 firefighters don't all fight fires. Who's in fire prevention, actively fight fires. Sure. And so they've had, it's amazing when you look at the numbers, and I have, that recently when they had 2 companies closed down on a Saturday night in Providence, they had 2 engine companies, I believe, and two ladder companies closed down, one on Admiral Street, and that was because they didn't have enough manpower, because you could only, there's a rule that the city never enforced before, but they decided to enforce it, and it ended up they got caught between swinging doors. They said that, okay, we're enforcing we're enforcing a rule. They said, well, if you work 38 hours straight, you can't come in. So the firefighters said, okay, if it's against the rule to come in after 30 hours, so now they didn't have enough men to call back. Yeah. And that's why they had to close stations. So it's a comedy of errors there. They're in arbitration, and the sentiment among lawyers in town and labor leaders is that, and labor lawyers, is that the firefighters have nothing to lose at this point. Nothing to lose at all.
I thought a nice moment for the firefighters this year was the G-Tech fire.
Oh, yeah.
Where that roof catches on fire, and not the Textron building
right.
caught on fire on the roof, and it was a Sunday, and it looked like the whole city was on fire.
And here's another
firefighters
thing.
went in and got to that top floor.
Sure. And there's another thing, and the fire commissioner, the police commissioner, or the commissioner of public safety, Perry, he's a state trooper, and his picture was in the paper with the fire hat on and the chin strap and all that kind of stuff. And the fire department does not have a chief right now. It has a former chief who's now acting as a consultant. He can only work 75 days a year. The fire chief is the public safety commissioner, who's a cop. I wonder how many fires he put out when he was a state trooper. And then we have the fire chief they did have there, they demoted him. So it's a confusing situation. It really is. And that's going to have a big, and I want to get into something else. GE going into next year, the possibility of attracting GE. The governor says, the city of, she was asked about the city of Providence's finances, and as you know, West Warwick, East Providence, Woonsocket, Central Falls all went through this adult supervision.
That's a nice way of putting it.
Exactly.
Adult supervision.
When you meet 3 or 4 of these,
slap on the wrist.
Yeah. When you meet these criteria, or part of the criteria that you've had a deficit, which the city had a $5 million deficit, when you've had a negative bond rating, which the city just had, when you have you've used up your surplus, now it's time for the Commissioner of Revenue to come in and say, okay, it's time now for us to put an overseer in. It's normally a rote thing. The overseer comes in, spends 2 or 3 weeks, and then the governor or the Revenue Commissioner appoints a committee to run the city and tries to avoid receivership, but then calls the unions in and tries to cut their contracts. And the city council has no control over spending.
As that's where Providence is going, in your opinion?
Well, Gary Sass, who used to be the revenue commissioner in the state of Rhode Island, said it's up to him. It's up to the revenue commissioner. It's not up to the governor. But I'm sure they'd consult. But the problem is we don't have a revenue commissioner because there hasn't been a permanent one appointed by this governor. And the revenue commissioner would come in and say, okay, the jig is up. And he said that if he was still revenue commissioner, he already would have been in there. And because it's that
bad.
yeah.
So in addition to the overtime for the firefighters, you're talking about a whole host of other problems. You had a state takeover.
Yeah, it's possible because you had a whole year to correct this and nothing's happened except you're getting more of a jackpot with the firefighters. You got $8 million out of a one-time solution last fiscal year, so that's not recurring. $5 million operating deficit, that's $13 million. They are incurring another $7 or $8 million in unexpected deficits from the fire department overtime, the way they handle it. That's $20 million. And we're not even through yet. There's more to it. There's one-time funding that they did last year, so it's a problem. And basically, what can happen is that situation can happen. But the governor is in kind of a juxtaposition here, a situation where
come on in.
Yeah, that's the problem. You can't say come into Providence because come to Route 195. You're going to get a great tax break. But you're going to go into a situation where the tax rate's not predictable. There's a revaluation next year, and I know you might get a tax stabilization, but the city may go into receivership. I don't think that's where GE wants to go. They don't want to go into a place like that.
Depends on how good the deal was, though. If they guaranteed, look, 50 years, you will pay this per thousand or whatever. I mean, you'd know. What would you just lock somebody in? 500 employees, move them all here.
They're fine. But it's like going to see. You don't want to build a house. John, if I said if you want to come into my neighborhood and there's 3 deckers all over the place that need paints, the house leaks, the grass is unkept, and I want you to put a new $1 million house right on the lot across the street and surround it, you're not going to do it. No. And that's exactly what you have here. But I hope they come.
But that, if you look at it from a devil's advocate, though, if I'm GE, I look at that as saying, look, Providence, they could give us everything. The state of Rhode Island could really, really come in with some unbelievable deal because we could say exactly that. Why would we want to go there?
The big
and
deal
they could
with
drop
them.
their pants and come up with an unbelievable deal.
I'll make my prediction. My prediction is they'll stay in Connecticut.
Well, probably ultimately they're working a better deal for Connecticut.
Yeah,
that's what probably is.
Let's go into other things that were big here. Let's go into the national situation.
Well, can I ask you one thing?
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
We had a presidential candidate here in Rhode Island.
Oh yes, Lincoln Chafee.
Governor Chafee.
And you went down for the announcement.
I went down to George Mason University for
that had to be a trip and a half.
He announced in June, and he was out in October.
That could have been your chance for a prize.
And here he is here talking, Lincoln Chafee.
How short-lived was that campaign?
It was something else. But when he was talking about it, this was the event, buddy. We're here, and this is literally a little auditorium that's been cut off by.
They shut half of it down.
Shut half of it down
because they couldn't fill the seats, basically.
And it was a decent little speech. But he's going along doing his thing. All of a sudden, he starts talking about the metric system. And Steve Nielsen from Channel 12 is sitting next to me. He looks at me and we look at each other like, did you see the metric system? And I was like, I think he did. I think he's talking about the metric. He wants to bring back the metric. Right then I said, well, he's done. I mean, the one thing, you want to have people tar and feather you and run after you and chase everything and say, no, the metric, force him to learn the metric system in America. Nobody wants that. Are you kidding me?
Don't criticize that too much. I'll tell you why. I'll never forget being in Washington one year with Senator Pell. And Pell was, a real great guy. I loved him. I thought he was a great senator. I didn't agree with his philosophy all the time, but, I thought he was a real gentleman. And he believed in that kind of stuff, too. And I'll never forget in his house, he was showing me around his place, and he said, that's my great-great-grandfather. I forgot what kind of relative, what it was, or what relationship, to what degree of consanguinity they were related. But he said, that's my great-grandfather, whatever he was here. He invented the division sign, so they're all way out there. Right? Well, another time I'm doing a radio.
You're in politics a long time. You know you're not going to force the metric system on anyone. I mean, that's not. Right then, everybody's like, the metric system. I mean, Mr. Chafee,
where are the old days?
He never got to 1%.
No, never got to 1%. And even though Stephen Colbert tried to, was it Stephen Colbert or
no? It was Conan O'Brien.
Conan O'Brien tried to get him to 1%
like made a little
for the
song up and everything. It was kind of catchy.
But he did get a little national attention, but it was for the wrong reasons.
In the national debate, though, with Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, and he says, I'm granite, Anderson, remember? And he says, well, you can't be too granite. And he goes, I never changed that issue. Of course, everything was, of course, social media is brutal.
Yeah.
They take a picture of him when he's at Bryan University in his little wrestling suit, and it says, definitely granite. And it shows a skinny little Chafee from when he was a kid.
And of course, then during the campaign, when he admitted that it was only his first week on the job, when he voted a certain way on I forgot what bill it was, but he said, oh, give me a break. I was when my father had just died, and I was thrust in there, and I didn't know how I was voting. And you just don't say that in a presidential debate. No. And that's what he said. Let's go on into, we can't let this go without the racial tensions and the terrorism. in the presidential election. Here we sit, you know, there's a resurgence of nativism. That's what the Pell Center down in Newport said, that another big story was the resurgence of nativism. I think it was the Pell Center that said that, which isn't nationalism, nativism.
Sure.
You know, which is to, you know, everybody coming in this country is they're the big problem.
I think Donald Trump's playing on that.
That's exactly what he's playing on. Why do you think Donald Trump is, he's still up in the polls, but he's up in the Republican polls, but Hillary beats him, not by much, but beats him in the general election, according to the polls. Getting nasty out there, isn't it?
Well,
Awful
that's
nasty.
politics, though. I mean, it's all
not
name
as nasty
calling.
as I've said. This is the
Well,
worst
I've heard
I've
you
seen
say
it.
that in one of your on the
Yeah.
weekly World According to Buddies. You had said you
Yeah.
had never seen it like this. I was surprised when you said that, because it usually does get nasty in the name calling, and
liars,
people forget about it. Though
you
this
know,
is a primary, and
Mexicans being rapists.
Well, that is different. That's
you
a
know,
whole nother level. That's
yeah.
politically correctness, unpolitical correctness to a level I have never seen.
I've never seen. That's what I'm referring to.
But I guess the reason why people ask me, why do you think Donald Trump's doing well? He's speaking to people who agree with him, obviously, and they say he's saying things that they think.
But they
haven't been
think,
able
but they're
to
not
say.
the majority.
They're not the majority yet, but I think when you break down the number of candidates, when you take Cruz and Rubio and Rand Paul and Chris Christie and on and on and on down the road, if you add all those up together and make that into one candidate, then I think you have more of an apples-to-apples comparison, as opposed to Donald Trump polling so well within the Republican Party, but because the vote is so fragmented.
The Republican Party is so afraid of Trump. I'm talking the established Republican Party, because they know it's a down ticket, and you know, that stuff may fly within the right-wing Republican circles, but it isn't going to be able to win a Republican in the White House for president. That's what they're saying anyway, but who knows. Gun violence. With all the guns we had and all the Charleston situation and the police violence, the alleged police violence, that was a big story that we followed also. This year, and it seemed like every night we had some kind of a disaster or some kind of shooting.
Well, what happened in Baltimore, I think, was the biggest thing when you saw the riots and people take over the Freddie Gray situation, where people just took to the streets. I mean, it was like the '60s all over again. It was a civil rights.
And that brings up the whole issue of gun control, whether the control of guns is really, or the non-control of guns is the reason for all of this.
I just don't think you're going to see anything happen.
No, you won't.
There is going to be no gun control legislation. I mean, people talk about it every year, and some fortunate situation happens, and nothing happens.
All right. Well, I'm getting it in the air that you know that we've had. There's so many other stories.
It went by fast, buddy.
It did. Thanks so much, John, for being
Thanks
here. Merry
for having
Christmas,
me, buddy. Appreciate
Happy
it.
New Year, and thanks for watching. Let me tell you that it's this went right by. I don't think these are the only stories that happened. We could have talked about a million stories. Thanks for listening. Happy New Year. From all of us here at ABC 6, and thanks for watching On the Record with Buddy Cianci on Channel 6, your ABC affiliate for Southeastern New England. Have a great afternoon.